President Jimmy Carter spent his entire long life in service of one form or the other to others, in the military, as governor of Georgia, as president, and then, of course, in his decades of work around the globe after he left the White House. He inspired a generation of advocates and politicians, including fellow Georgian Stacey Abrams. President Carter was a vocal supporter of Abrams' work on voting rights, and he campaigned with her in her race for governor of Georgia in 2018. And Stacey Abrams joins me now. It's great to have you on the program. I would love to hear what your relationship was like with Jimmy Carter. Obviously, the Carter family, I know, looms enormously large in Georgia Democratic politics.
I would say it looms large in Georgia politics because part of the legacy of Jimmy Carter was his commitment to rural Georgia. And that's how I got to know him first. I actually met him when I spoke at the Boys and Girls Club of Americus, Georgia, or Southwest Georgia in Americus, which is his hometown. And he was there. He was there at a Boys and Girls Club banquet because it was so important to him that young people had belief that there was a better future ahead. The images of me with President Carter and Mrs. Carter were from the opening of a medical center because Georgia has refused to expand Medicaid under Republican leadership. And he answered the call by opening his own clinic to ensure that the rural communities had access to health care. If you saw a problem that was political in nature, Jimmy Carter was going to try to solve it through humanitarian efforts, but he never shied away from the political reality that power was there to be used to make people's lives better. And he was essentially committed to doing that no matter what the platform or the title. One of the things that any Democratic politician any Democratic politician anywhere, any politician, but particularly in the South, and particularly in the South in the 1970s, like Jimmy Carter, had to negotiate were controversies around race, particularly when he's running for governor the first time. Very intense and active live debate about desegregation, segregation, the like. His record there was really interesting. I mean, there were times where he sort of ran to the right on those issues, times where he ran to the left. And I'm curious how you think about that legacy when you sort of look in context of the complicated journey of a white politician in the South like Georgia at that period of time. I think you're right to use the term complicated, but I also think about evolution. There are those who not only began in the wrong place, they've lived there, they've built housing there, they have committed themselves to remaining mired in prejudice and discrimination, justifying their bigotry by claiming that it's necessary. Jimmy Carter looked for ways to be better, and he confronted his mistakes by doing things about it. And so despite the behaviors that may raise some eyebrows, this is the same man who appointed Ambassador Andy Young and told him, go and meet every leader you can on the continent of Africa because we have ignored this place for too long. He is the person who used his power both in the White House and then afterwards to lift up communities, especially communities of color, to provide access to service, and who made as part of his central legacy fighting for voting rights. That was something that disproportionately affected black and brown people, especially black people in Georgia. And he did the work. He didn't just talk about it. He showed up, he spoke up, he challenged power. And that evolution, I think, speaks volumes about the character and the core of the man. Yeah, one of the most fascinating sort of parts of his biography was his 1970 run for governor, which was successful, in which he arguably ran to the right of a primary opponent on these issues. And then when he won, he has his inauguration. He says this, quite famously, I think surprising a certain number of people who had voted for the man. He says that the time for racial discrimination is over. Take a listen.
I say to you, quite frankly, that the time for racial discrimination is over.
The muted applause there is a thunderclap in Georgia politics. How do you think about the through line from Carter, who obviously wins his home state when he runs for office? Bill Clinton wins it, I believe, in 96 and reelect. He doesn't win in 92, but he wins it in 96. Biden wins it in 2020. All the other years it's been Republican. About the sort of trajectory of your state and Democratic politics there.
Well, Actually, Clinton won in '92 because I got to work on that campaign.
Oh, he did win in '92, right? Yeah, sorry. Thank you for the correction.
Absolutely. No, I think that what we saw in Jimmy Carter, what we saw with Bill Clinton, what we saw with Joe Biden, and what we almost achieved with Kamala Harris is, again, the evolution of a state that is becoming more and more recognizable as a bellwether of how our political futures will be shaped by who we give primacy to, who we give humanity to, who we give opportunity to. And the people who win Georgia and serve Georgia best are the ones who see all of our state and all of the people. I'm, of course, deeply disappointed about the outcome in 2024. But what I hope we take from the passing of Jimmy Carter is the innovation that he brought to politics. When he won the presidency in 1976, he did something no one had ever done. This governor from Georgia took himself to Iowa and essentially remade Democratic politics. We have to remake how we think about our future. We have to do it by understanding the complexity of where we are, but by having a vision for what is to come. And I think more than anything, what Jimmy Carter tells us about the politics of the South is that we are constantly learning. We have absolutely every opportunity with each election to pick something new, to be braver than we were the time before. And I'm just honored to have spent time in his orbit and to live in a state that he believed in so deeply that he never left.
I want to present with you a certain view of the lessons of both Jimmy Carter and the recent election of Donald Trump that I think is a tempting one for certain people, and I've heard people articulate it, and I want to hear what you think of it, which is basically that essentially decency is for losers, that if you kind of appeal to people's better angels or you like call on them for things like self-sacrifices, as Carter famously did in that speech about the sweater, that American people don't like that. What they want is they want to find someone to blame, that demagoguery and sort of those politics are very effective. And, you know, maybe Democrats have to find their own version of that, essentially, because what gets people going in politics is like who they're angry at. And I'm curious what you think about them.
I think decency is a choice. It's a difficult choice, but one that, when viewed authentically, has this effect of boosting confidence and boosting morale. It cannot be by itself the only offering. Yeah. And I think what we saw, unfortunately, with President Carter was that when decency confronts ignominy, ignominy has a leg up because ignominy is willing to do things that decency won't. But that doesn't mean you abandon decency. I think it means you find other allies. You do more. You accumulate more who want what decency can offer. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think the challenge for Democrats is that we think that if we abandon decency, we can get what ignominy has. I would argue that if we expand the ambit of decency, that's how you bring more people in, because we keep misremembering what happened in November. Yes, Donald Trump won the election, but this wasn't a landslide. Mm-hmm. It was an evenly divided nation. He got more people, but this was not this seismic shift where 58% of America said no. It was less than 50% of the electorate who said, this is what we want. Our responsibility is for decency to show those who stayed home, those who stayed silent, that there is a place for decency and a place for them. That's the work that has to be done next. Not trying to replicate the bad, but trying to amplify and make good an attractive opportunity, an attractive option, and a true choice.
Stacey Abrams, thank you so much for taking some time today. Happy New Year.